Christians talk about Christ being Logos, but what does that mean? The thesis of Veritopia is that all these religious ideas are actually very simple scientific concepts that have been turned into mysticism by the religions of the world. Religions are like vaccines, delivering an attenuated version of the truth in order to protect people against the actual truth. So instead of Christians worshipping the principle of Logos or reason, they worship a man called Jesus, who is associated with that concept instead. Thus Christianity converts the legitimate worship of logic into the idol worship of Jesus. Also, it's the thesis of Veritopia that there was once a unified science and religion, which was worldwide and was a fully correct and consistent theory of everything. The remnants of this science remain in the modern world in the concepts of the Tao, yin and yang, the four elements and the 7 days, gods, or in Christianity, the 7 spirits of creation. When you put these together, you get a complete and reasonable theory of everything, which unifies all of science and religion, in my opinion. So, in summary of Veritopia, God must have created or already had logic in order to create reality. This is just basic logic itself. God must also have had time, and as we know, God is love, and love is desire or will. And so this is the real demystified Trinity that the Christians like to talk about. So they have, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And what does it mean? It's quite obscure. It's mystical idea. It's something that isn't supposed to necessarily make sense. It's supposed to get you wondering about things rather than actually answering questions. So the real Trinity is the things that you need in order to create something, which are desire, which is the why you want to create something, logic, which is how you're going to do it, and time, which is when. It's as simple as that. That's the true Trinity. Furthermore, so God is truth, and truth is reality. We're in reality. So think about that. Christ is logic. Logic divides truth from fiction. And the Tao, yin and yang, is creation. It's both yang truth and yin fiction, and it is the foundation of all knowledge. And the Tao creates the 4 elements which describe the process of creation as a fractal tree. It's a deep concept. It's very simple, but it's very deep. So God is the archetype of truth. Christ is the archetype of logic. And knowledge is truth divided from fiction. And the 4 elements is the archetype of knowledge. Or rather, the Tao is the foundation of knowledge. So I suggest that what made civilization and people great was that our ancestors worshipped truth and reason as deities. Not just kind of gods that they made up with some fancy name. They knowingly worshipped truth and reason as deities. Imagine the kind of culture that would produce. One where truth is actually worshipped as the highest ideal and as God. And logic is worshipped as the clear and straight path to God. So we use logic every day in our everyday lives. But what the heck is it, Well, I'm going to make the assertion that it is the sword of God. If any Christians are in any doubt as to whether the words logos and logic are the same, then please just look at the etymology. They are the same word. So logos is definitely logic. I've put some definitions here of logic from various sources on the website. It's quite difficult to define logic because it's so fundamental. And essentially they go with logic is a way of finding things out, of separating true from false. That's basically it. So logic is synonymous with reason, and it's a means for determining the truth of a statement. But what is it? How can it do that? How can logic find truth? If logic can find truth, then how much truth can it find? Can it find all of it? Well, although we use logic routinely, we don't tend to think deeply about the implications of it. We don't tend to think too deeply about anything, actually. But what are the implications of the existence of logic? Well, it implies absolute truth. If it's a means of finding truth, then truth must exist. There must be actual truths which exist in order for logic to have any meaning. Science assumes that absolute truth exists and that they can be found by observation and reason because that's its purpose. The word science is a synonym of knowledge, and a definition of knowledge could be to understand truth. So science also implies that absolute truth must exist. Logic also implies a non-physical reality. The fact that logic is required for matter to exist and that logic is not made of matter seems a fairly thorough logical proof that the universe is founded on non-physical principles. Because it's inconceivable to have this material reality without the super reality of non-physical logic, there seems little room for doubt that this is the case. The fundamental material of the universe cannot be matter. And logic implies an intelligent creator. The ability to reason is the essence of intelligence, and we could define it as such. If logic must exist before matter, then the universe is a mental construction. If logic is the definition of intelligence, then the mind is intelligent. Thus the universe exists within the mind of an intelligent being. Logic, the divider. So I propose we reframe and redefine it a little bit. Logic allows us to distinguish one thing from another. Logic can tell us this is not that. Without the logical not operator, it would be impossible to have a reality comprised of separate things. So logic would have to be a prerequisite to a creation event. I'd go further and say that without logic it would be impossible even for a God to conceive of creating anything. It is assumed that an intelligent God would create the universe for a purpose, not by chance or mistake, but without logic one could not identify a need, create a plan or execute it. Without logic it's impossible to have numbers or relationships or anything that we can conceive of. Without logic there could be no concepts or ideas, at least as we understand them. Logic makes knowledge possible. So I propose that logic is not just a means to determine truth, it's the primary mechanism by which truth and reality is created. So it's not a passive principle, it's an active principle. Or it can be both. Some may argue that logic is an emergent property of the universe, atheists specifically. But there could have been no singularity without logic, no laws of physics, no quantum foam. We can't imagine any form of reality or math without logic. Any argument against the pre-existence of logic must be an argument against logic itself, and, science, fundamentally it's an anti-science argument. Logic divides the Tao. So the Tao, which you're going to have to assume exists for now, I guess, if you don't already understand it, they could not have been divided without logic, so logic precedes the creation of yin and yang. So I'd suggest it seems we're getting very close to a Christian description of the Logos, which they identify with Christ. So if these things are the same, then this characterises the Christ as the spirit of science and knowledge, the spirit of truth, or finding the truth, which corresponds nicely with one of Jesus' most famous quotes. Bit of a typo there. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And I am the way, the truth, and the light as well. Anyway, it places Logos above nature, and it's not part of it, which is correct. So in John, first chapter of John, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Just replace word with logic, and it's the same thing. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him. In him was life, and the light, and it was light. So Christ is light, because logic is light. Reason is light. It is the enlightenment. Reason allows us to be enlightened, and the darkness comprehended it not. Well, this is yin doesn't understand yang. Essentially, darkness doesn't understand light. So logic preceded the Tao, heaven and earth, and so was with God in the beginning, when there was only God. Of course, God would have had to have created logic if it didn't already exist, in order to divide yin from yang and to be able to create things. So nature is the not God. In order for God to create something, the thing he was going to create had to be not God. It had to be something else. It had to be different from him. And so in this, according to this theory, he created two, because two is not one. There are two possibilities of how God created the two. Either God contains both good and evil, and he divided those pre-existing qualities out into yang and yin, or God contains only good, or to be fair, God only contains evil, and he created one of them in the image of himself and created the other as the opposite of that. Of course, I'm sure there's a reasoned argument why God cannot be evil, but we'll get there. Actually, it's in the properties of yin and yang. God can't be evil. But anyway, we'll talk about that one day if anyone's interested. I've said this is open for discussion, but I do kind of lean towards that God is only good. So absolutism and relativism is yang and yin. Yang is absolute, yin is relative. And anyway, we'll talk about that another day. So the sword. In Revelation 1:16, the Christ is described thus: "And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword." So the sword symbolises logic because it separates things. It divides one part from the other, just as logic separates truth from fiction. The Christ is portrayed as having a sharp 2-edged sword coming from his mouth, and I don't think it could be clearer in its symbolism. Logic is the sharp 2-edged sword which cuts both ways, and it's coming from his mouth, and logic is expressed through your voice, and it is choice. And so this correlates the Christ principle with the voice principle of the universal plan, and the second step after God. And it's interesting to note that the 7 stars in his right hand are there because they could easily correspond to the 7 gods of matter, the 7 spirits of creation, the universal plan. One thing about Christ that people don't often talk about is the fact that the symbol of the cross is the same as the symbol of the crossroads, and the crossroads symbolises choice. So choice is free will. If we don't have the power of reason, we can't choose. Without knowledge and reason and understanding, there's no possibility of making an informed choice. To be free is the same thing as being able to choose. So the more choice you have, the more free you are. And so the spirit of free will, which is the Christ spirit, the logic spirit, must also be the spirit of finding truth and knowledge. So this all makes complete sense. It's completely logical. It's funny that the crossroads is associated with the devil. You go to the crossroads to make a deal with the devil, but that's because the crossroads symbolises choice. That's why. Christ is considered by the Christians as the mediator between God and his creation. And, well, logic is the mediator between truth and creation. You can find truth, we are the creation, obviously, and we can find truth through logic. And through logic, creation was created by God. So it is the mediator, in that very simple sense. Logic is a part of God because it was used to create reality, and we can use logic to know reality. Logic completes the circuit of creation. God used it to create us, and we use it to know God. It makes sense for it to be considered the ultimate concept, or spirit, because all concepts are spirits. They're not matter, they're spirit. And I really think this view of the Christ of Christianity is far more helpful, far more accurate, and it elevates Christ as well, rather than it just being a guy. I mean, not that I'm putting Jesus down at all. I think he was, if he existed and he did achieve the things that were described, what a fantastic guy. But you can't worship the creation, you have to worship the Creator. That's the rule. So I would suggest that Christianity, or at least the religion that Christianity subsumed, was based on the worship of truth and reason. And this is the unification of science and spirit. Because if you use logic, you find God, and you find the things that I'm talking about, on the website. And it demystifies the whole thing, and it makes religion redundant, and it unifies everything. At least it does seem that way to me. I'm totally open to debate on this, and let me know your opinions. Well, thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you next time.